Hi people, today I'm going to be showing you guys every vehicle in Anomic and their real life counterparts. However, I'm only going to include personal vehicles that you can use on any team, so I'll go over job specific vehicles in a separate video. First up, we have the Hatchback. This vehicle was inspired by the 1977 AMC Pacer Wagon, and I actually kind of wish that they made the headlights jut out just like on the real one, but otherwise it's a pretty good match. And I do like the chrome bumpers. I think that's a nice touch. Next up, we have the Sedan. This vehicle was inspired by the 3rd gen Chevrolet Caprice, and I think this is also a very good match since the real car is just as boxy as the Anomic version. Next up, we have the Minivan. This vehicle was inspired by the 4th gen Ford Econoline E150. Besides the fact that it can't hold 7 people, the minivan is a decent resemblance to the real thing. Next up, we have the van. This vehicle was also inspired by the 4th gen Ford Econoline E150, but this time it's the cargo variant, so it's pretty much a minivan, but with a lot less passenger seats and a lot less windows. Next up, we have the station wagon. This vehicle was inspired by the 3rd gen Buick Estate. Both of these vehicles share many design features, like the chrome grille, the hood ornament, and the wood panels, so I think this is a really good match. Next up, we have the Lowrider. This vehicle was inspired by the 1960 Chevrolet Impala. This is probably my favorite Impala just because of the rear end design, and whoever modeled the Lowrider did a very good job of replicating it. Next up, we have the SUV. This vehicle was inspired by the Jeep Wrangler TJ. The front end also reminds me of a Land Rover Defender, but the soft top and the overall proportions is more like the Jeep, and I think the spare wheel was a nice touch. Next up, we have the pickup. This vehicle was inspired by the 4th gen Chevrolet CK. I do like Chevy's front headlight design on the pickup, and the rear end looks fine as well, so overall a nice looking truck. Next up, we have the Team Pickup. This vehicle was also inspired by the 4th gen Chevrolet CK, but this one has the Centurion package. Pretty much the same design as the pickup, but with 2 more seats, 2 more doors, and a longer wheelbase. Next up, we have the Sedan Facelift. This vehicle was inspired by the Oldsmobile 98 Regency. This vehicle is pretty similar to the sedan, but it has a lot of extra design features, like the chrome grille, the vinyl roof, and the rear taillights stick out a little, which I think looks really good. Next up, we have the Dune SUV. This vehicle was also inspired by the Jeep Wrangler TJ. The design is pretty much the same as the regular SUV, but it comes with more seats, a different paint job, and it doesn't have the soft top, unlike the regular SUV. Next up, we have the Convertible. This vehicle was inspired by the BMW 325i E30 Cabrio. I really like the BMW kidney grille design, but the only thing I don't like on the Convertible is the raised rear end, but I guess it would actually be better at protecting your head from bullets. Otherwise, the Convertible is a pretty good match to the BMW. Next up, we have the Coupe. It's really hard to tell what inspired this car, but it does look similar to the MG MGF, so we'll just go with that. The grille design and the overall proportions are very similar, but I still think the taillight design is really ugly. Next up, we have the luxury SUV. This vehicle was inspired by the 1st gen Chevrolet Tahoe. The front end design is pretty much the same as the other Chevy pickups, which I think looks fine, and instead of a bed, the rear end is just a big box, just like the real thing. Next up, we have the muscle car. This vehicle was inspired by the 1st gen Dodge Challenger. I really like the black hood stripe and the black painted roof on the Challenger. And as you can see, they also did that on the muscle car, so I think it looks really good, and it's a pretty good match to the real thing. Next up, we have the sports car. This vehicle was inspired by the Porsche 911 964. I really like the front end design with the circle headlights, but in my opinion, the rear end just doesn't look right. It's too blocky, and compared to the Porsche, this vent looks a little bit out of place. Next up, we have the luxury car. This vehicle was inspired by the Mercedes-Benz S-Class W126. The front end design of the luxury car looks very similar to the Mercedes, and it even has a cute little hood ornament, but the rear end is a little bit higher, so I guess that's different. but otherwise it's a pretty good looking car. Next up, we have the Supercar. This vehicle was inspired by the Ferrari F40, but unfortunately it doesn't have pop-up headlights. It does share a lot of other design features like the rear engine cover and the big wing, but it doesn't have side air intakes, unlike the real Ferrari, so still looks rather plain. Next up, we have the Hypercar. This vehicle was inspired by the Bugatti EB110, which is pretty easy to tell from the horseshoe-shaped grille. Like the Supercar, this thing doesn't have side air intakes, which I really think would make the car look cooler, but its simple design still looks good too. Last but definitely least, we have the Humvee. This vehicle was inspired by the M998 Humvee. The Anomic version looks pretty accurate to a real slantback Humvee, since the design isn't that complicated, and the back doesn't even have a window, so not much to say here, but it does have a spare tire, so that's nice. Well, that's going to be it for today's video, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching.